Thank you so much for joining us tonight, everyone. This is week 7 of TD Culture Lab Artrepreneur 101. And tonight we're going to be learning about budgets. My name's Susan. I'm the administration lead at the Mississauga Arts Council. This webinar is part of our TD Culture Lab Professional Development Webinar Series, presented by the Mississauga Arts Council and sponsored by TD Bank Group. We go. So, the Mississauga Arts Council is a registered charity dedicated to fostering the growth of the arts sector by cultivating creative opportunities and connections between artists and residents of Mississauga and beyond. MAC is dedicated to providing service-based programming to artists, funding artist-led programs, and growing awareness of the arts to build a vibrant and thriving cultural community in Mississauga. We also acknowledge that the land on which we gather is part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and Wyandot nations. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and give our respect to these peoples and their ancestors who have been inhabitants and caretakers of this land since time immemorial. We also recognize that Mississauga is now home to many global Indigenous peoples. And a little about me, I introduced myself. I'm the administration lead. I've been with Mississauga Arts Council for 5 years. And I run the office, I write our grants, and I manage our microgrant program, our arts care program, and our TD Culture Lab program. And as I was saying earlier, I'm by no means an accounting expert, but I've sort of figured out some tricks to throwing budgets together for easy projects, for more complicated projects, navigating the Canada Council templates, which are a lot if anyone's had to deal with those in the past. And so I am here to bring you a little bit about what I know for budgets, and hopefully it'll help you with your endeavors along the way. So today, what we're going to be talking about, first off, what is a budget? Second, why do you need one? How do you make one? Some accounting terminology that you might have heard before. What does it mean? Accountants have weird, fancy things they like to say for pretty simple concepts. And then we'll go over some best practices and tips that I have as well. I do have some resources that I'll be able to share as well at the end of this presentation. What is a budget? A budget is just a document that outlines money in and money out over a period of time. So for an organization, maybe that's over a month or over a year. For an artist, maybe I know we have a singer-songwriter on the call today. So maybe it's your next album, right? Money in and money out for just that album. For a visual artist, maybe it's a piece you're working on for an exhibition coming up. It could really be anything, project-based, event-based, your life in general, you could put a budget together for. It can show personal finances or organization budget finances. It's really just a tool to help you see what's coming in, see what's going out, and see if it balances or not. So budgets are a financial work plan. So you've probably had to put together a work plan. Here's the first thing I'm going to do, and this is when I'm going to get it done by. Here's the second thing I'm going to do, and I'll have it done by here. The milestones in a project. A budget is just a financial version of that. What are you going to do? How much is it going to cost? And how does that relate back to the big project? It's also a chance for you to stay on track. You can see what money's coming in, right? Maybe you're doing a concert and everything's counting on ticket sales. Well, that's great, but you're not going to get paid for ticket sales until after your show. And you probably have expenses before your show. So it helps you kind of see what's going on and plan for that as well. A big question, you're putting together a grant application or you're reaching out to a sponsor and you wonder, how much money do I even need? Right? Like we could all ask for $1 million. How wonderful. But how do you actually spend $1 million? Right? So by putting together your budget, you outline your revenue, a fancy word for money coming in, and you outline your expenses, a fancy word for money going out, and you can easily understand, where you are. Do you have more money coming in than money going out, or vice versa? If you have more money going out than money in, then you need more sponsorship. You need a grant. You need higher ticket sales. And it just gives you a chance to sort of plan for that, move things around and figure out how to make things work so that you're not on the hook at the end of your project because you've lost so much money. Yeah, I have here for example, say you're setting your ticket prices. How much are you going to set your ticket prices for? Okay, $20. That sounds great. But how much do you actually need to cover your expenses? Maybe if you set them at 25 or 30, it's not a stretch for people to buy your tickets, but it helps you cover some of those expenses and help you plan for that. So that's really what a budget can do is help you make those decisions about money going forward. All right. Why do you need a budget? I sort of talked a bit about that in the planning in the last slide. Um, why would you put one together? Often, if you're applying for a grant, if you're applying for sponsorship, if you're seeking money from some other party, they will ask for a budget. They want to know how you're going to spend their money. So they want to see how you're spending your money. So you'll need to put a budget together for them. Putting together a good budget will give that funder confidence that you know what you're doing, you've thought your project through, you're not, you haven't missed anything. You're planning a concert, but you forgot to pay for the venue. That's a huge expense that is going to change your project because all of a sudden you have a $3,000 bill that you weren't counting on, right? So it gives by planning it out really well, the funder sees that you're organized, they see that you're on track, and they understand that you will be responsible with their money. So that's really important. It's also a chance to keep track of your money and make sure your project is on track. So don't be afraid of the budget. Yes, you'll put together a beautiful PDF that you give to the funders, that you apply for your grant, that sort of a thing. But keep a working document, and every time a bill comes in, update it. Um, I'll show you in a template later. You have your column of here's what I sent the funder, here's my budget, and then here's my actual numbers, right? So you budgeted, say, $5,000 for your venue. Well, it turns out you got a really good deal. It's only going to cost you 3,000. That's wonderful. Now you can put money somewhere else. And by keeping that, here's what I had, here's my budget, here's my actual, and then you can see the difference. What are you saving? Where have you gone over? If you save money on your venue, maybe you can hire an extra artist and pay more in artist fees, right? And by keeping a working budget of these numbers that move every single day, that's okay. As long as you're keeping track, the numbers will change and you can keep things on track. So that's why it's really important to have a working budget. And I have here a well-planned budget. It instills confidence both in you to run your project well and in the people that you're approaching to support your project as well. And it helps you keep your project running really smoothly. You're not kind of sitting there going, oh dear, what do I need? You can go back to your budget and see where you're at. How do you make a budget? Um, I have a basic template. I sort of, from other grant funders and other places, I put one together. We actually make it available on our website and we encourage or voluntold, if someone sends us a different one, we're not gonna say no. But if you're applying for a Mac microgrant, we do ask that you fill out a template that looks pretty much identical to this one that we're going to be sharing with you. Um, it's a pretty simple one, showing the money in, showing the money out. Um, and I have a link to it at the end. Um, one of Susan's hot tips, if you don't love spreadsheets, start to love them. If you're trying to do a budget in a Word document, you can set up a little table, you can make it all work. But if you do it in a spreadsheet, you can have the spreadsheet calculate totals for you, which is really useful. You don't have to keep going to your calculator and punching numbers in. You can just set it and forget it. And I'm happy to pull up a spreadsheet and show some calculations during the question and answer period. So here's a basic template, really simple. I started a spreadsheet. I have a column that says item. What is the thing? Is it money coming in? So is it grant funding? Is it tickets, venue, artist fees? I also have photography and advertising. If I'm planning a concert, these are sort of the basic things I'm probably going to be spending money on. Then the next column I have is revenue. Revenue is that fancy word for money coming in. Then I have my expense column. That's a fancy word for money I have to spend. And then I have this magical column on the end called notes. Most budget templates will have a section for notes, and that's really an opportunity. If you're just doing it yourself, you can kind of do some math, but if you're giving your budget to someone else, it's a chance for you to use your words to describe what's happening. So as you can see here, if we didn't have that notes section, you can kind of go, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But by adding that notes section, now our grant funding, we know exactly who the grant funder is. Someone has applied for a Mac micro grant for $2,500. Perfect. We know who gave it to us. We know it's solid. We know how much it is. Lovely. For tickets, this is an interesting one. I put tickets as both a revenue, money in, but also as an expense. Why did I do that? Well, because if I'm selling my tickets through Eventbrite, if I'm having my show at the Living Arts Center and I have to use their box office, which is Ticketmaster, all of the ticketing companies will charge you fees to process your tickets. So here I have 50 tickets at $25 each. That's going to be my revenue side, the 1250. And then I have a $25 sort of flat rate expense for Eventbrite. I kind of made those numbers up. Those aren't exactly what they are, but it shows that I'm aware that Eventbrite is going to charge me to sell tickets through their website. And again, it instills confidence and you're aware that you have this extra $25 you have to cover somewhere. And then after that, we don't have any more money in. It was really just that grant and ticket sales. Great. That's amazing. That's what concerts are all about. And then for our expenses, you can see here we have an hourly rate for our venue. 8 hours is a lot for a concert, but maybe we want to do a rehearsal before the concert, or we want to do some sound checks in the afternoon and then do a concert in the afternoon. So, 8 hours would be a rehearsal and then the concert. We also have artist fees. So in this case, I'm saying that we're going to pay $500 to 5 artists. That's a pretty big amount, but hey, it's covered by our grant. How lovely is that? And then extra things at the end, if you're going to do a concert, hiring a photographer to get some really good photography of your event, some action shots, people on stage, wonderful addition to the concert. And the other one too is, we want to have people showing up. So we want to have advertising. In this case, some social media, maybe some posters that we put up in local coffee shops, um, that sort of a thing. So, $80 isn't a lot, but it's enough to let the local community know that something's going on. So that was, off the top of my head, putting together a few little expenses for a concert. And at the bottom here, I have this line for totals. So you can see our money in, the revenue we got from our grant and our ticket sales, we have $3,750. Hey, that's pretty sweet. And when we calculate all of our expenses, we're at $3,455. Okay, cool. So in this last column, I have surplus. Surplus meaning money we made. We made $295 on our concert. Hooray for us. So that $295, maybe that goes to the organizer. Maybe that just goes back into the pot for next time. It's wonderful. If our expenses were more than what we were bringing in, maybe we don't sell 50 tickets, maybe we only sell 30 tickets, then in that case, we're not going to make as much as our expenses, and that $295 surplus might actually be something called a deficit, which is we didn't make money and it would be a negative number. We'll get into that in accounting terms, but that's sort of a general budget. There's nothing fancy about it, but it really demonstrates that we've thought through what this event is going to be. And with the notes section, we're showing where those numbers are coming from. We're not just making up numbers. We've actually thought through what is the cost and how many artists are getting that amount or how many hours at what rate for the venue. And that's really important to show that these numbers aren't just made up out of thin air. Okay, so in my example here, think to yourself, what costs might be missing, right? Maybe this advertising cost isn't enough, or maybe there's, other artists. Maybe we have a videographer. Maybe there's other funding we get in. Maybe there's donations, or maybe there's a company that is donating, or sponsoring, giving you some money towards your concert because they're a local business that want to support. So there's lots of other expenses and also lots of other revenue that we could be including in our project. Maybe you got not just a Mac micro grant, but maybe you got another grant to put on this concert as well. So I put together this little word cloud of some terms just off the top of my head that I could think of. There's probably some you've seen. There's maybe some that you haven't. Budget, we know what that is. Income, money coming in, expense, money going out. We've talked a bit about that. We've talked revenue. I just introduced you to a surplus up at the top and deficit. If we spent more than we made, that would be in lower down. So all of these fancy words have pretty simple explanations, but I just wanted to throw a few up you might uh, that you might have heard in different places. HST is another one. Unpack a few of them on this slide. Okay, so first up, revenue, income. Those are fancy words just for money that's coming in. That could be a sponsorship, a donation. It could be volunteering. It could be, yeah, anything else that's going to be money in your pocket or save you money. That's revenue or income. An expense, that's money going out. So artist fees, venue rental, any cost, expense slash cost, any cost that you're going to incur with your project. I just mentioned HST. So this is sort of a fancy calculation. When you're starting off, you're not going to have an HST number. You're not going to be charging HST. When you get to a certain point and you're making a certain amount for 2 consecutive years, I believe, I'm not sure what the threshold is right now, maybe 30,000 a year for 2 consecutive years, then the Canada Revenue Agency is going to catch up with you and say, oh, here's your HST number, and you have to report starting last year. So be aware of this. Look into it if you haven't. I'm pretty sure I have a link later. Um, be aware that when you start doing well as an artist, you're going to have to charge HST. It's a little bit of extra work. Once a year or twice a year, you have to do a return, but any money, any HST you've collected, you compare it to any HST you've spent, and then it balances out. More about that later if you need. But basically, once you start collecting HST, that simple budget that just had the expenses, we're just going to need to add a couple columns. So net or subtotal is basically the amount before tax. So you've probably seen that on your receipts, right? You buy 2 shirts at $9.99, your total is $18.98, and then there's 13% HST, and then a total at the bottom. So gross amount. So we have net pre-tax plus HST tax equals gross or grand total. That's what that one's about. All right. 3 more fancy terms. Balance. It's not standing on one foot. It is a fancy term for if you take your revenue, money in, and minus your expenses, money going out, then you get the balance. If it's positive, congratulations, you made money. If it's negative, well, you spent a little more than you made. And if it's positive, that would be a surplus. You made a profit, you have surplus, that's a positive balance. So you had more money coming in than money going out. And if it's a negative balance, that means you have a deficit or a loss. It just means that you spent more than you had coming in. Another one I mentioned, I don't have it on this slide, but when I talked about revenue income, I mentioned that volunteering also counted as revenue income. So that's another fancy term. I don't have it on here. It's called in kind. Sometimes you'll see it on grant applications or you'll see it on other things. Our micro grants, we talk about in kind revenue. So basically, what that means is if somebody volunteers, they say, you know what, I want to help you with your project. I'll sit at the door, I'll sell merch and I'll sell tickets and do that for you. Well, that is now an expense you had to hire someone to sit at the door of your concert and sell your merch. Now you don't have to. So that is, yes, it's an expense. Maybe you were going to pay someone $50 to sit at the door and sell merch, but now you also have that in revenue. So even though it's now money you don't have to pay, it's still money that you don't have to spend. So it kind of balances itself out, but yeah. So yeah, any sort of, if someone donates a prize for a silent auction, that would be an in-kind contribution. Or if they're volunteering, or if someone says, you need a rehearsal space, come and use my cafe. We close at 6. You can use it from 6 till 9 for your rehearsal. Again, it's an expense you don't have to spend money on anymore. So that would be an in-kind sponsorship or in-kind support. Best practices and tips. First off, best effort. Do your best to capture all of your income and expenses, but it's okay if you miss things. My simple budget before, I was probably missing things. Maybe. Or maybe things come up through the project, right? The project changes halfway through, and now you have a new opportunity, or your prices have changed because something has happened. That's okay. It's better to have something and to be flexible with it than to not really know and just sort of go in blind. So you can always add expenses later. You can always add revenue later. Be kind with yourself and do your best effort. Next point, budgets are living documents. Yes, today your grant is due and you submit a PDF document. That's gone, the funder has it. But your actual budget, your working budget, is a living, breathing document. As expenses are coming in, as revenues are coming in, you're going to be changing those numbers, and that's good. You can still have that sort of here's what I thought it was going to be column, but update that working, the actuals, and you'll be able to see what's going on. You'll be able to know what to do when. You'll be able to see what has changed, what hasn't changed, and it'll really help you keep your project going. So don't be afraid to make changes on it, even as the project is going. It's a living document. I already talked about the budget notes, the magic column. Use the budget notes, especially in a grant application. You put in your numbers, that's fine and dandy. And, the grantors love seeing the numbers, but the numbers don't mean much without the context of how you got to those. So again, back in the budget sample I used where I was saying $2,500 in artist fees. If that's all you had, then the person reading it kind of goes, oh, well, someone's getting a really good payday, but they don't realize that that's 5 or 6 or 10 artists getting a smaller amount. Or they see, $1,000 for your venue. Okay, I mean that might be what it's going to cost you, but that kind of feels like a made up number when it's such a round number. So by using the budget notes and saying, here's how I got to that number, or this is an estimate, we estimate the travel fees will be that, $80 per person, and there's 2 people, so $160, right? However you came to that number, include it because it just shows that you've thought through the number and you haven't just dashed it down. And it gives the person seeing your budget a chance to understand where you're coming from and how it fits with your project. Next up, don't forget to pay yourself. Don't forget artist fees. And if you are not in that concert example, what was probably missing was the concert producer fee. We paid 5 artists to perform, but we didn't pay the person who wrote the grant and did the budget and talked to the venue and signed the contracts and hired the photographer and was probably taking tickets at the door, right? We didn't pay that person. And so make sure to include an administration fee, or make sure, as the concert producer or the curator of the visual art exhibition, don't forget to pay yourself. That's important. You're an artist too, so make sure to pay yourself. And then this last point, depending on if it's just a working budget for yourself, then you want to see the actuals, money in, money out. If you're submitting a budget to the Canada Council or the Ontario Arts Council, that's what these CCA, Canada Council, OAC, Ontario Arts Council, they have these very complicated spreadsheets that you have to fill out. And what they want to see is that your revenue, money in, and your expenses, money out, equals 0. Not every funder feels that way, but they do. And their sheets, their forms that do all the calculating are very specific that they have to equal each other. And so what they want you to do with that, and the way you can balance it out, they have a line that says artist contribution. And that's where that means you have more expenses than revenue, and you as an artist are going to take out your own Visa card, you're taking cash out of your wallet and putting it towards this project to make sure that balances out. Ideally, we don't want any number in that line. We don't want you to have to dig in your pocket just to make your project balance for the Canada Council, but that's a line you can use to make that balance. More on that in the questions, because that's a complicated thing, but make sure to pay yourself. And then for the big funders, make sure that revenue and expenses equal zero. They want to make sure, if you say, oh, well, here's what my expenses are, my revenue's here, and you're going to come in for this, and I'm still missing $6,000, they say, okay, thank you very much. Next. So make sure you have it planned out so that everything does equal everything during that application. For resources, Mississauga Arts Council, back in, I think, 2021, we did a webinar called Creative Money. It was with an opera singer named Chris, and he is now a financial planner. And he, opera singer started doing well, and then the Canada Revenue Agency came back and said, "Oh, you owe us money because of HST." And he said, "I don't know what that is." And so he's built his career around helping other artists and making sure that they are not in that situation. So we have a YouTube video of his presentation, which was really great. And he was helping, especially with planning budgets when you're on gig income, right? One month you might make $6,000 and then you don't have a paycheck the next month because your mural project is done, or you're a theater actor and you're between shows. So how do you bridge that gap and plan for it? And it was a really great webinar. So I encourage you to watch that. That's this YouTube link here. And the resources he provided were fantastic. He has a personal budget planning and a couple other documents. So that's on our website. It's available for free. Please have a peek and look at it. They're really wonderful. And then the other document I have here is Susan's awesome budget template. I don't think it's officially called that, but this is the budget that we give to artists to fill out when they're applying for a microgrant. It's a pretty simple budget. And it has a column for revenue, both, and especially for applying for a project, it sort of has pending and confirmed. So pending means I don't know if it's going to happen. When you're applying for a grant, that's pending revenue. Confirmed revenue is money you already have in your pocket. So it has those columns. And then for expenses, it has, here's what I think it's going to cost. And then an opportunity for you, for grant winners microgrant winners who do receive a grant, they can use the same template and then do their actuals as well. So this is a lovely resource, and I'm happy to pull that one up and show everyone as well. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this wild and crazy crash course through budgets.